course, we can't have a conversation about the newsroom without talking about Iran and the conflict with Iran. So now the latest development coming out of Iran is that Iran has threatened to for a fully offensive stance as tensions rise between the two countries and in the region. So now you have a senior Iranian official that says Tehran will move towards a fully offensive. So far, Tehran has said that they were only responding to attacks, either by Israel or the United States. And now moving into fully offensive is going to essentially take this conflict to a war to a whole nother level, because this conflict continues as the negotiations over the Strait of Hormuz remains unresolved. Essentially, Iran is saying that they need to become the authority over the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States is saying no. President Trump is saying no, they're going to be um, and the authority over the Strait of Hormuz. So now Iran has reportedly plans to adopt a more offensive military posture, and you have U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright that has made claims about Strait of Hormuz oil movements that reportedly exceed estimates from independent trackers, saying that they are moving, even though we're seeing the numbers from independent trackers that they're not, of course, anywhere near what the numbers were. And so President Trump has threatened military action against Oman if it obstructs this agreement. So now this agreement's between Iran and Oman to be able to formalize their authority over the Strait of Hormuz. So now Oman is being pulled in from President Trump's comments. Now, congressional Democrats are preparing another war power resolution, and then this continuing disruptions around the Strait of Hormuz is affecting energy markets. It's the latest numbers for the month of July. Canada's inflation numbers going to 3%, and it has contributed to higher energy costs. So now when you have the Strait of Hormuz as one of the world's largest important oil transit routes, any disruptions, and we've had disruptions since March of this year, any military escalations can also increase energy prices and what it means for international shipping. So this is very significant as we're watching the developments in between Iran and the United States, and if it could take any turn. Now we're also getting closer to the November midterms, and if this essentially stretches to the midterms, then this could be quite devastating for the Republicans, because essentially this war was believed to be led by the President of the United States, and that he was led into the war by the Israeli Prime Minister. So this is quite significant of how America and the rest of the world are now dealing with this energy crisis because of what took place earlier this year. And the Democrats have launched negative ads in competitive House races. So you have the Democrats that have two competitive House races that have launched their first negative television advertisements against their Republican opponents as the general election campaign intensifies for the midterms. So you have the Arizona Democrats, Joanne Mendoza, is spending about $300,000 on advertisements attacking Representative Juan Kismo-Suomoni. And now this is significant because the spot connects the two when it comes to Republican candidate to Trump, and the claims that he has no spine, essentially saying that that's a negative ad, saying that he's just going along with President Trump. And you also have the ads playing in Ohio when it comes to Representative Marcy Kaptur, who's spending about $110,000 on advertisements against Derek Marin. So now Kaptur's campaign calls Marin a corrupt insider, and the Ohio advertisement focuses on First Energy, which is electricity rates, and data centers, which is not so popular amongst the voter base. So now when you have this negative advertising, well, it generally increases as the campaign moves closer to the primary positions, and to make sure that there's a contrast between each candidate and each party that they stand for, to make sure that the voters have a clear, decisive choice. So now this news coverage could test maybe some of the factual basis when it comes to this advertisement. But when you do negative ads, essentially taking one aspect and amplifying it to really see what is the voter consensus on it. Are they going to react positively or negatively based on the ad? So that is what's happening, as it means that those are highly contested seats. And the Democratic Senate candidate, Abdul El Sayed is launching a six-figure advertising campaign portraying himself as an authentic Michigan populist capable of challenging established political institutions. So while his ad describes him as, and in quotes, as Michigan as you get, is what El Sayed is calling himself and branding himself. The advertisement uses language about making Michigan great again. It includes commentary from both Bernie Sanders and Fox News host Jesse Waters. And now the advertisements will air on Fox. The campaign represents about a six-figure investment. And El Sayed has previously run for Michigan governor and is associated with the Democratic Party's progressive wing. So it's very interesting as he's now on the progressive side of the Democratic establishment, but yet his language is, very Republican based in terms of this whole MAGA, right? Making Michigan great again. So there, and him being a populist type of politician that contributes to really getting what works from each side in terms of his branding, right? So now that's his latest messaging that, is designed to reach voters outside of conventional progressive media audiences to say, hey, I'm here and I'm vying for your vote. So this is very interesting because he's really made rounds. If you look him up on social media, there was a campaign ad from his grandparents who are Caucasian, and they say they endorse him, so he's really qualifying himself as very American, very Michigan. And so this makes it for a very, very interesting midterms elections. And the Department of Justice plans 1,000 election monitors. That is a big deal because they're reportedly planning to deploy the approximately 1,000 election monitors for the November midterms. So Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon said roughly 1,000 monitors would be sent out, and the deployment is planned for the November midterms. The federal monitors generally observe compliance with voting rights and election laws. The announcement arrives at a time where there's heightened partisan conflict over election administration. This comes at a time where you had President Trump say that essentially Biden stole the election from him, if you recall that. So, well, there hasn't been any evidence about that, but now this is another push to make sure that when it comes to the midterms, that it's above board. So now you have the Justice Department regularly monitoring elections in selected jurisdictions, but now there's a concern involving voter access, when it comes to voting access, discrimination, and compliance with court orders. So they're saying that they're deploying the 1,000 monitors as a way to be able to see, to be able to monitor what takes place and what legal authority they will exercise based on, is there anything compromised or is everything above board? Now, there was also a headline about fabricated political polls that have entered the online news ecosystem. So now, when it comes to median strategies, they say that they released fake polls as a short-term social experiment to demonstrate how easily unsupported political data can be amplified online. We know that if you now talk to majority of voters, if they're in the younger demographic, they'll tell you they get their news from Instagram. So this is very interesting as the organization intentionally circulated false, meaning fabricated polling information. It described the operation as misinformation experiment, and it showed that at least one purported result was picked up by California Post. So, well, when you have a news agency that picks up a fabricated poll, then here is the reason why it gets circulated. Now, how would have California Post known it was fabricated is also the other question. So now the exercise raised questions about poll verification by media outlets and political commentators who are looking at poll numbers and essentially discussing it and not knowing if it's fabricated or if it's real, but how do you qualify that? So when it comes to legitimate polls, they should disclose their sponsor, their field dates, their sample size, their population surveyed, collection method, weighing, and margin of error, which contributes to how a poll becomes authentic. When it comes to fabricated or opaque surveys, they can influence fundraising, candidate coverage, as well as a perception on momentum, right? Perception is everything when it comes to politics before the exit polls. Sometimes you have voters that really want to support the winning candidate. And when you have favorable numbers in what would be a poll, then that could really sway voters and perhaps even when it comes to donors in their investment dollars.